Why the wealthy love communism. A presentation of Publius Productions, narrated on June the 15th, 2015. My name is Ralph Epperson, and I will be the one presenting this information. I have been lecturing on the subject of the conspiratorial view of history ever since I taught at a community college in Oregon in 1973. One of the things I discussed with my students then, and as I am discussing now, is the reason that the very wealthy in America are dissatisfied with the free enterprise system and have endorsed the communist economic ideology. We Americans have been taught that those of us who believe in the capitalist economic system are to hate the competing communist economy of communist Russia. They are our enemies, and we have become theirs. But what I will be discussing here in this presentation will be the reasons why the very wealthy capitalists believe the communist system is the system that grants them the power to be extremely wealthy. This was adequately explained by Vladimir Lenin, the Marxist communist who led the bloody communist revolution in Russia that started in 1917. As long as capitalism and socialism exist, we cannot exist in peace. In the end, a funeral dirge will be sung over either the Soviet communists or over world capitalism. This is Dr. Anthony Sutton, perhaps this nation's leading researcher into the issue of the connection between the wealthy and communism. He wrote this on page 17 of his book entitled Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, published in 1974. One barrier to the understanding of recent history is the notion that all capitalists are the bitter enemies of all Marxist communists. This erroneous idea originated with Karl Marx, the father of modern communism, and was undoubtedly useful to his purposes. In fact, the idea is nonsense. There has been a continuing, albeit concealed, alliance between capitalists and communists to their mutual benefit. This alliance has gone unobserved largely because historians, with few notable exceptions, have an unconscious Marxian bias and are thus locked into the impossibility of any such alliance existing. In other words, capitalists and communists are not enemies, they are allies. John D. Rockefeller, described by Wikipedia as the wealthiest American of all time, and he made this enormous wealth in America's free enterprise system during his nearly 100 years of life from 1839 to 1937. When Rockefeller passed away in 1937, his influence passed to his son, David Rockefeller. This is his book entitled David Rockefeller Memoirs, published in 2002. Let me provide you with some evidence that this Rockefeller was one of those who embodied the fact that the capitalists and the communists are not enemies, they are allies. This is capitalist David Rockefeller meeting with the communist Fidel Castro of Cuba. This is capitalist David Rockefeller meeting with the Chinese communist Zhou Enlai, who was responsible with Chinese Communist Mao Tse-tung for the murder of as many as 60 million Chinese during the Chinese Communist Revolution of 1923 to 1939. This is capitalist David Rockefeller meeting with the Russian communist dictator Nikita Khrushchev. This is capitalist David Rockefeller meeting with the Russian communist dictator Alexei Kosygin. Now, since we are taught that the communists hate the capitalists, one could expect that these communists should arrest this capitalist and try him for crimes against the working class. But none of these communists arrested and tried Mr. Rockefeller, a hated capitalist, for being an exploiter of the working class. Furthermore, notice that David was smiling in each of these pictures. He wanted to be there, and he knew that he was in no danger of being arrested. And in fact, each of the communists were smiling as well, because they knew that the capitalists and the communists are not enemies, they are allies. Now, I want to explain to you that I'm not an attorney, but I can read the English language, and it appears to me that Mr. Rockefeller was breaking a law by meeting with all of these communist heads of state. Let's read the law together that seems to apply to these meetings. The Logan Act, enacted on January the 30th, 1799, shortly after the Constitution was adopted, is a United States federal law that criminalizes negotiation by unauthorized American citizens with foreign governments having a dispute with the United States. But what do I know? I am not an attorney. And let me hasten to point out that David Rockefeller was never elected to any office in the United States, which means he was not authorized. But I can discuss someone who was elected, and he spoke about the connection between the capitalists and the communists, and that elected official is President Bill Clinton, who was elected twice in 1992 and 1996. And to enter his remarks into the discussion, I will have to go back to 1964, when Bill Clinton graduated from high school in Arkansas. He started his college education at Georgetown University in September of 1964, and he graduated in 1968. One of his professors at Georgetown was Dr. Carroll Quigley, who published this book entitled Tragedy and Hope in 1966. Notice that this was sometime between his sophomore and his junior years at Georgetown. This is a poor quality copy of an article that appeared in the Georgetown Alumnus magazine for the winter of 1993, meaning 25 years after Bill's graduation from 1968. You will notice that the red rectangle points out that Quigley's book was required reading for Quigley's course. That means that Bill Clinton was required to read Tragedy and Hope sometime during his 4 years at Georgetown. So we can now read what we know Bill Clinton read. This is a quote from page 950 of Quigley's book. There does exist and has existed for a generation, meaning since around 1926, an international Anglophile. By the way, the word Anglophile is defined as primarily English. But notice that the group is international. So this international Anglophile network operates in the way that the radical right, meaning in Quigley's mind the right-wing conservatives, believe the Communist Act. In fact, this network has no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other group, and frequently does so. So President Clinton has clearly confirmed the statement that the capitalists and the communists are not enemies, they are allies. The way to begin this discussion is to define some economic words so that what will follow will become clear. Everything in the world is either a capitalist good or a consumption good. Consumption goods are those that are consumed by the consumer because they satisfy human wants or desires. Perhaps the best example of a consumption good is food. A capital good is produced to assist the consumer acquire or produce his consumption goods. A farm produces food, a consumption good, and the tractor that plows the ground and or plants the seeds in the rows is a capital good. This, this is a drawing of a rabbit, a consumption good. By the way, this is an example of my own artwork, not too bad for, for 12 years of art school. And this is a picture of a consumer. This consumer was born hungry, as are all consumers, and he catches the rabbit so that he can prepare it for a meal. But as the consumer ages, he slows down, and for some reason the rabbit seems to speed up. So the consumer decides that he needs some sort of tool to assist him in catching the rabbit. So he produces a blowgun so that he doesn't have to run as fast as before to catch rabbits for consumption purposes. As soon as the consumer builds a blowgun, he becomes a dreaded capitalist because he has produced a capital good, the blowgun, to assist him in acquiring rabbits, a consumption good. Every civilization in the world is a capitalist civilization if it creates capital goods. To illustrate the point, here is a picture of some capital goods in a free enterprise system, and here is a picture of a series of capital goods in a socialist or communist system. All of these economic systems have buildings, railroads, and factories so that they can produce other capital goods or consumption goods. As I said, every civilization is a capitalist system if they utilize capital goods. Now I would like to discuss the ownership of the capital goods. This is a picture of a capital good used by a family to assist them in acquiring consumption goods. And for the record, this is not my car. The parents bought the car, registered it, and paid for the insurance and the cost of maintenance. And in this case, their 16-year-old son drives the car more than the parents. Whenever the son has the car, he has control of it, but the parents must still maintain it and pay the insurance on it and fill the gas tank. So ownership without control means little. When Junior is driving the car, the parents still own it, but Junior controls it. Now let's say that in America, individuals or corporations own and control the capital goods. This is called the free enterprise system in America. There is a competing economic system where the state owns and controls the capital goods. It is called socialism. Socialism, or as Vladimir Lenin called it, communism. Communism. And there is a system between the two of them where individuals own the capital goods, but the state controls them, and it is called fascism. Fascism. Now, to discuss the final economic system, I must define two economic words. The first is the word monopoly. It is defined as one seller of a particular product in the marketplace. A grocery store in a city where there's only one grocery store has, by definition, a monopoly in that market. This is called a natural monopoly because there is simply not enough consumers to warrant a second grocery store. However, there are no restrictions for another grocery store to enter the marketplace to compete with the first store. Notice that the people, by their buying habits, determine how many grocery stores can sell their products in a free enterprise market. In a second grocery store, if a second grocery store opens up and does not acquire enough consumers to purchase their product, they will go bankrupt and leave the marketplace. So the people control how many grocery stores can operate in a given marketplace in the free enterprise system. However, there is another type of monopoly, and this one gets government to pass laws or regulations limiting the ability of others to enter into the marketplace, and it is called a coercive monopoly. A coercive monopoly. No one else can enter the marketplace because the government has passed laws or regulations to prevent any other company from entering. There is one more term that I must define, and that is a cartel. It is defined as two or more sellers in a marketplace continuing to set the price of a product. Now that we have defined these economic words, let me provide you with a little example bringing all of these factors into play. Let's start out with one gasoline producer in a free enterprise system. I will call his company Gas 1. Perhaps he was the one who discovered oil and then how to refine it to gasoline for a market needing gasoline to power their automobiles. Let's just say that he decided to sell a gallon of gasoline at a price of $15 a gallon. And let's just say that he can produce 1 gallon of gasoline at a cost of $1. That means, of course, he will make a profit of $14 a gallon, and since there's no competition, the marketplace has to pay it if they want his product. Now, of course, this profit margin is clearly exorbitant, but there is a way to reduce his price and break the monopoly. In the free enterprise system, anyone can enter the marketplace. And let's just say that a second company enters to compete. I will call this company Gas 2. Gas 2 knows that they cannot sell their product for more than $15 and get a share of the marketplace. They could sell their product for $15, but they would share the marketplace with Gas 1. But since the profits are high, let's say that Gas 2 sets his price at $14 minus the cost of $1 to produce a gallon of gasoline. He will then make a $13 profit. Let's just say that in our little example, every time there is a price reduction, the consumers shift their allegiance to the other company because the price is lower. Now, to get his company back to where it was, Gas 1 decides to sell his product at $13, making a profit of $12. And to get back to where it was, Gas 2 will reduce his price to $12 with a profit of $11. In a free enterprise market, each company would be free to set its own price. Let's just say that Gas 2 lowers his price to $1, meaning he will make no profit, hoping that this will force Gas 1 to close down. But to destroy Gas 2, Gas 1 would lower his price to 50 cents, meaning he will lose 50 cents on a gallon of gasoline. But as I said, in a free enterprise system, each company is free to set their own price. But notice this. Who benefits by this price competition? Obviously, it is the consumer, because they're now able to buy a gallon of gasoline for 50 cents, where originally they were paying $15 a gallon. Secondly, if it costs Gas 1 $1 to produce a gallon of gasoline and he sells it for 50 cents, he will lose 50 cents. But where does the extra 50 cents come from? Gas 1 has to return 50 cents a gallon from his exorbitant profits collected when he was selling gasoline for $15 a gallon. Obviously, this price reduction does not please Gas 1. Now, this reduced price drives Gas 2 out of business, and when that occurs, Gas 1 will increase the price back to $15, the price he was charging at the beginning of this gas war. Now, in a free enterprise system, anyone can enter the market, so a company called Gas 3 starts selling his gasoline at $14 a gallon, and the process starts all over again. Gas 1 ultimately lowers his prices to 50 cents a gallon, and Gas 3 is driven from the marketplace. So Gas 1 would be free to increase his price back to $15, and he will start making an enormous profit once again. Let's say that Gas 4 enters the marketplace and starts the price war over once again by charging $14 a gallon of gasoline. This obviously displeases Gas 1, so he gets together with Gas 4 to form a cartel of Gas 1 and Gas 4. And together they jointly raise the price to $15. Once again, a cartel is defined as when two or more producers join together to sell a product. So the price will rise to $15 once again. But notice this, Gas 1 now has at best a 50% share of the marketplace where he originally had a 100% share. This is not acceptable if Gas 1 wants to be the only producer of gasoline. But notice once again that in the free enterprise system, anyone is free to enter the marketplace, and Gas 5 decides to do just that. And the price war starts all over again. Once again, to repeat it, in the free enterprise system, anyone is free to enter the marketplace. And in this instance, Gas 5 would break the cartel by reducing the price to $14. Cartels cannot exist in the free enterprise system as long as others may enter the marketplace to compete. Now, if Gas 1 and Gas 4 decide to invite Gas 5 into the cartel, Gas 1 and Gas 4 would have only a 1/3 share of the market. There has to be a solution for Gas 1, and there is. Gas 1 remembers learning about a coercive monopoly, and he decides to buy a government by funding political candidates committed to passing legislation to restrict the access to the market to only one business, Gas 1. Please remember, a coercive monopoly is defined as one seller in the marketplace and that his business is permitted to be the only producer of gasoline by the acts of a compliant government. As long as he continues to support the government to enforce the restricted access, he will be the only one selling gasoline. So in summary, it is important to point out that, once again, monopolies can be destroyed by competition in a free enterprise system. Cartels can be destroyed by competition in a free enterprise system. Now let me discuss some of the writings of others who have discussed this. This is Frederick Clemson Howe, Ph.D., an economist, lawyer, and a special assistant to Henry Wallace, the Secretary of Agriculture, and later the Vice President to President Franklin Roosevelt. Dr. Howe wrote this on page 157 of his book entitled The Confessions of a Monopolist. These are the rules of big business. Get a monopoly. Let society work for you, and remember that the best business is politics. For a legislative grant, franchise, subsidy, or tax exemption is worth more than a Kimberley or Comstock load. Now these were 19th century gold mines, since it does not require any labor, either mental or physical, for its exploitation. This is once again Dr. Sutton, who wrote this on page 72 of his book entitled Wall Street and FDR, meaning Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Old John Rockefeller and his 19th century fellow capitalists were convinced of an absolute truth. that no great monetary wealth could be accumulated under the impartial rules of the free enterprise system. The only sure road to the acquisition of massive wealth was monopoly. Drive out your competitors, reduce competition, eliminate the free enterprise system, and above all, get state protection for your industry through compliant politicians and government regulations. This last avenue yields a huge monopoly, and a legal monopoly always leads to wealth. And on page 100 of his book entitled Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, Dr. Sutton further amplified his point. The financiers could, by government control, more easily avoid the rigors of competition through political influence. They could manipulate the police power of the state to achieve what they had been unable or what was too costly to achieve under the free enterprise system. In other words, the police power of the state was a means of maintaining a private, coercive monopoly. Now, the wealthy looked around for an economic system where they could hire revolutionaries capable of overthrowing a free enterprise system and then finance them. And when they took over the reins of power, the wealthy would be granted coercive monopolies by the revolutionaries they had financed. And they discovered Vladimir Lenin, a communist who wanted to create a communist system in Russia. The first meeting of Lenin and the wealthy monopolists occurred in London in 1905, and they agreed to loan Lenin the funds he would need to hire revolutionaries to overthrow the Tsar of Russia. The revolution was successful in 1917 when the Tsar abdicated and the communists took over the power of the government. And the price that the communists paid for the loans of the money necessary for their revolution was the ability to do business with a coercive monopoly called communism. Communism. Once the communists took over, they granted full power to the communist government. They alone could decide who did business in that nation. They granted exclusive coercive monopolies to one company in a particular field, and they were granted the exclusive right to do business with the communists at monopolistic prices, meaning they could make exorbitant profits. This was the reason the wealthy created the communist nation known as Russia. Someone else wrote about the support of the Russian economy by Western capitalists. This is Dr. Werner Keller, who wrote this book in 1961 entitled East minus West equals Zero. Pages 8 and 9 of the introduction say this. If Marxism postulated an industrial society as a prerequisite to communism, and if Russia were not then an industrialized country, it must be transformed into one with all speed. Dr. Keller points out with a mass of confirming evidence, the West, meaning the monopolists of America and Europe, was called in to provide the skill and knowledge to get industrialization underway. And the West provided it. This is once again Dr. Sutton, and this is what he wrote on page 169 of his book entitled The Best Enemy Money Can Buy. There is no such thing as Soviet technology. Now I'm going to repeat this, hopefully to emphasize just how important this statement is. There is no such thing as Soviet technology. Almost all, perhaps 90 to 95%, came directly or indirectly from the United States and its allies. In effect, the United States and the NATO countries have built the Soviet Union, its industrial and military capabilities. This is so important that I need to repeat it. In effect, the United States and the NATO countries have built the Soviet Union, its industrial and military capabilities. This is a little booklet entitled A Businessman Looks at Communism that was published in 1960 by Fred Koch, the owner of the Koch Oil Corporation of Wichita, Kansas. Mr. Koch discussed the fact that his company built 15 oil cracking plants in Communist Russia between the years of 1929 and 1931. Perhaps Dr. Sutton summarized just how important this aid and trade with the Communist Russians was when he quoted part of a speech that Secretary of the Navy John Lehman delivered when he spoke to the graduating class of the U.S. Naval Academy on May the 25th, 1983. This quote is found on page 113 of Sutton's book entitled The Best Enemy Money Can Buy. Mr. Lehman said, "Within weeks, many of you will be looking across just hundreds of feet of water at some of the most modern technology ever invented in America." Unfortunately, it is on Soviet Russia's ships. But perhaps the greatest and most important comment that Professor Sutton made is this one, found on pages 208 and 209. 58,000 Americans have been killed in Vietnam by our own technology. For those not familiar with the war in Vietnam, it was between the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese between 1964 and about 1975. It was known that the North Vietnamese had received about 80% of their war-making technology from the communist nation of Russia, and we supplied the South Vietnamese. Now let me return to the quote from Dr. Sutton. "We have built ourselves an enemy. We keep that self-declared enemy in business. This information has been blacked out by successive, meaning by both the Democrat and Republican administrations. The attacks in Vietnam were made possible only by Russian armaments being supplied to the North Vietnamese and our past assistance to the Soviets going back to 1917, the year the communists took over the Russian government. While I am discussing the war in Vietnam, I would like to mention my 4-hour DVD entitled Vietnam, America's Betrayal and Treason, because it is perhaps the greatest review of America's aid and trade to Russia during the entire war. If you want to know why the American government first planned the war in 1945, although it did not officially start until 1964, and then made certain our fighting forces could not win it, this DVD is worthy of a view. It is on the internet, and it may be viewed there at your convenience. Dr. Sutton listed 165 American companies who have been trading with Communist Russia between 1960 and 1985 in Appendix F on pages 231 through 235. I've listed 24 of those companies that the average American might be familiar with. These are Alcoa, Alice Chalmers, Bechtel, Bendix Corporation, Boeing, Borg Warner, Chase Manhattan Bank, Douglas Aircraft, DuPont, Ford Motor Company, General Electric, General Motors, Gulf Oil, Honeywell, IBM, meaning International Business Machines, International Harvester, Kaiser Aluminum, Lockheed, Monsanto, Pratt and Whitney, RCA, Sperry Rand, Standard Oil, and Xerox. Let me now draw this discussion to a close by mentioning there was another price to pay for the ability of these coercive monopolists to make exorbitant profits. In 1970, the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee released a study entitled The Human Cost of Soviet Communism, which asserted that at least 21 million Russians 21 million Russians have been executed or starved to death or have died in prison camps in the Soviet Union by the communist partners of these monopolists during the past 51 years. The author of the report stated that his estimate was conservative and that the real figure may have been as high as 45 million Russians. 45 million Russians. That is the actual price for the ability of these monopolists to do business with the Russian communists. Why the wealthy love communism? Let me end by asking you 3 questions. Why has our major media not made this public? Why have our colleges and universities not taught this? And more importantly, why haven't our elected officials put a stop to this? And the answer is obvious. They do not want you to know the truth. Thank you very much, and may God bless America.